people from Sweden and Switzerland. It's interesting because I lived in Sweden. My ex-girlfriend was Swiss as well. And so now I'm back here living in Australia. So it's hitting me with all kinds of emotional feels to see especially some familiar faces from the other side of the planet. So that's what a great way to start this out. So yeah, I guess I'll do what I came here to do and talk a little bit about the PO product owner role and how and why I think it perhaps needs to evolve from what a lot of us still look at it as. But I'll share my screen as a place to start. Let's try that. Oh, hold on. Let's go share. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think the PO role must transcend its humble, agile beginnings. And in order to do this, I'll first start out and talk a little bit about what my journey has been like with the role itself. So just to get started, this is where I started out my career. So I studied a Bachelor of Science in digital media. I noticed someone here is from Perth. That's where I'm originally from. So I studied at Edith Cowan. And after university, I worked a bunch of different roles. So I worked in tech support. Yes, I was the guy asking if you've turned it off and on again. I worked as a web developer, an account manager, project manager. I even did a little small stint in search engine optimization, which I think I was pretty good at, but I absolutely hated. And eventually I landed a job in a tiny tech startup in Melbourne in 2010. And I loved the idea of building a product for consumers. And, I love the idea of being the client rather than servicing a client at the time. And I was really excited by that. And a startup was a great fit for me because I had such a broad set of skills. I could do a bit of the tech stuff. I could feel like I could lead a development team. I could manage the delivery. Hell, I could even do some of the search engine optimization work. And most importantly, I didn't have to wear a suit. So that was great. You can see I'm wearing a hoodie. So but at this point, I knew absolutely nothing about Agile. And so pretty much on my first day, the founder handed me a very thick folder of specifications with Post-it notes on the pages that the development team in Calcutta in India hadn't delivered on. They were delivering our product to a fixed scope and budget and time. So I got to work. I flew to India and I flew to Calcutta. I met the team and I worked hard to get them to deliver what they promised. Over time, we were shipping the features that we were supposed to deliver. But one day I had a conversation with our founder and our CEO that really put things into perspective. And he asked me, so how's progress coming along on our advertising platform? So we were building a website that aimed to connect businesses that were willing to offer a discount to communities, say, for example, anything from a large company wanting to offer incentives to their employees to your local football club, for example. And advertising was one way that we were going to make money on this website. And so the question was, well, how's progress coming along on the advertising platform? And we hadn't started. And whilst I could have said, look, we haven't started, but we'll get right on it, something really didn't feel right. And then it hit me, wait, why the hell would we bother putting all this time and energy into serving up ads when there's no one to see them? Seems obvious. But something had to change. We were losing money. We were getting closer to the end of our runway, and seemingly we had nothing to show for it. Thank goodness for the Wayback Machine, because I was able to dig up an old screenshot from the website, which was pretty cool. So a mindset shift was needed. We read the Lean Startup and it hit us. We were building a product that no one wanted. We had the build it and they will come mentality, and this was not serving us at all. So we needed to be agile. So what did we do? We ditched the development team of roughly about 12 people in India for a team of only 2 people in Manila. We ditched project management, the book of specifications. We threw all of it out in favor of Scrum. Now, did I go off and do a Scrum Master course? No, I learned from reading Wikipedia. This was my introduction to Agile. And eventually we actually scrapped the entire product that we had spent so much time and money on, because it was obvious and it was clear that no one really wanted it. No one was going to use it. And so we launched a totally new product. And so we pivoted to attempt to capitalize on the whole Groupon craze that was going on at the time. And we got out of the building. So we actually started showing our product to people in coffee shops, you know, and we did the whole lean startup approach of validating our assumptions about the product. And so from these changes, we actually started to make money, crazy enough. And people were using our new product. And for me, I'd learned the basics of being a Scrum Master and to some extent a product owner, along with how to test assumptions of a product with random people in a coffee shop and on the street. And actually, after all of this effort, we were on track for a corporate merger with a company in the same market, and they were going to help us save the business. Well, and until we kind of ran out of money, it was too late, and our runway ran out. But for me, this was like one of the most formative experiences, experiencing what it's like to build a product that no one wanted, and to start to turn that around came with lots of learnings. So I'm really grateful for that experience. I learned a lot about testing assumptions. So after this job, I ended up getting a job in Sydney at a company called Vivant, which is no longer around. But they were a predominantly UX and mobile development focused agency that were working with Commonwealth Bank and Telstra and some of these really big companies mostly they were very heavy in UX and user research. And they were taking a lot of the funds that they were making from servicing these clients, and they wanted to build their own products to sell back, ideally sell back into these large companies. So they hired me because they knew that I had this more scrappy kind of agile startup background, whereas they were working very waterfall with their big clients. So they knew that they needed to do things a little differently if they were going to build a product on the smell of an oily rag, as they say. So I came in to this product management role with some basic agile knowledge. Throughout the time working there, I went off and I did my Scrum Master training and my certified product owner training. And I found that these tools that I was using for the product for this company were broadly applicable across the rest of the company. So I kind of transitioned my role into being the Agile coach for the rest of the company. So I learned a lot about user research, which was really awesome to me. And all of these learnings made me somewhat of a well-rounded product owner. And then the transition to being an Agile coach taught me a lot about how to build successful teams, how to coach people to solve their own problems, and so on. But for the most part, I was still executing on someone else's vision for a product and very heavily influenced by my stakeholders. I was basically taking their ideas and executing on them and testing them. So you could say that, you know, I'd gone through this amazing journey from having a project mindset, you know, where you're mostly focused on, you know, time and scope and cost, to like an agile mindset. And along the way, I'd learned some product discovery and user research techniques, which I found really helpful in the role as well. But coming back to the PO role, if you read the Scrum guide, here's what it has to say about the product owner role. You are responsible for maximizing the value of the product. It also says, you know, you're either the customer or you're the voice of the customer, and you manage and prioritize the backlog. Now, don't get me wrong, these are important things, and they've brought us a long way since the days of project management as a means to build product. But there's a bit of an issue here. The loosely defined kind of umbrella of Agile has one rather big challenge, in my view. Agile is really so much about how you deliver software. And to be clear here, I'm mostly talking about Agile practices that have come about since the manifesto. The manifesto wants us to focus on customer value indeed, but it assumes a solid understanding of the product market fit, and that if we're wrong, we'll find out in 2 weeks when we show progress, for example. In fact, the manifesto is quite agnostic about what it is that you're delivering. They use the word project and product interchangeably. So unfortunately, it has very little to say about what or why you should deliver anything at all. User stories are great for formulating outcome-driven statements of value for a customer. But how you arrive at that story is kind of a mystery. And honestly, that's fine. The Agile Manifesto was started by 12 software engineers. So after this experience working at a startup, I joined, Yes. So I'd been working at this company in Sydney, this agency, and I was using all of these skills that I'd learned, both the practical, tactical aspects of writing user stories and acceptance criteria and managing a backlog and all of these sorts of things. And I'd learned a lot about coaching teams and Agile in general in a more broader sense. So I was learning a little bit about lean UX and so on. And so these other skills I found quite helpful for trying to deliver a great product. So my understanding of the role started to shift and change into this idea, what I've been kind of calling product ownership 2.0, right? So not only are you just delivering on a backlog that sort of someone has given to you or has said, we need these features, or we need a product that does this and that. And you go, okay, and let me break that down for you into stories and so on. And kind of out of necessity, the definition of product ownership for me evolved to be a little more encompassing of product discovery and holistic to the level of trade-off decisions needed to build a great product. It started out as a means to deliver software iteratively and learn from that. Now it was about attempting to balance these three sometimes competing concerns to build a great product for customers. And this is the definition that I was pretty comfortable with and how I would coach and mentor POs. By this stage, I decided to shoot for the stars, and I attempted to get a job at Spotify. It was late 2012, early 2013, and Spotify for me was the poster child for this stuff, right? I had no idea if I was good enough to work there, but I really wanted to find out. So I applied, and I applied both for their PO roles and their Agile Coach roles. And I ended up landing the Agile Coach role to my absolute surprise and delight. And what Sakti was talking about before was at the end of every interview, I would absolutely hound them to give me feedback, because I was treating it as if it was going to be my last interview ever with them, because I really wanted to know where were the gaps in my skills and experiences, because to me they were the bar, and I wanted to see where do I match on the bar. And it turns out that humility helped me to get the job. So my high-level view of the PO role is that you deliver value by balancing discovery, so testing your assumptions to see if something is worth building, and delivery, actually building it, of a product or part of a product. You manage the backlog, you manage stakeholder expectations, and generally discover a product that brings value to customers and the business. The tools taught at a certified Scrum product owner course are very helpful in working with an Agile team to deliver on this, but frankly, more is needed, namely an understanding of these three key areas. Ideally, you validate your assumptions before committing your team to deliver something, lest you deliver something that turns out to be based on flawed assumptions and thus not valuable, or something that no one wants. So I landed this job as an Agile coach at Spotify. I first started out working in the data infrastructure tribe. where all of this knowledge of building products went out the window, and I had to coach really techie people working in the basement, so to speak. And that's where I got to learn a lot about team dynamics and stuff that I hadn't learned before, which was really great for me. It wasn't what I wanted going in there, but it's certainly what I needed, which was wonderful. Then I worked on this really innovative feature called Spotify Running, where I got to use a lot of these sort of lean startup tools and techniques that I'd learned over the years to help a team figure out if Spotify is going to build something around running, what should that be? And this was before the book Sprint by the Google Ventures folks ever existed. So I had to invent a product discovery method of working, which was no easy feat. And I wish they had brought that book out back then, because it would have made things a lot easier. But in working more close to the product side, especially with something so innovative, my itch to get back into building products really started to grow and grow. And so I started applying for product owner roles at the company, and I was getting turned down a lot. And I really couldn't understand why. And the feedback I was getting was really hard to interpret. But eventually a position opened up, and I got my big break. So I ended up becoming product owner for this team called KM Infra. And this was the perfect team for me. Quite techie and focused on meeting the needs of internal customers. Not too much product complexity. And for the most part, it all went pretty well. So you can see on the diagram here, this is kind of like a sketch of Spotify's desktop client. And my job was that I owned the underlying infrastructure that powered the client and that feature teams relied on to get their feature into the client. So as you can see our mission and vision up on the screen. Our vision was that if you're creating features for the desktop client, that developing with quality for desktop is effortless and provides fast feedback, and that the releases that go out to the customer are frequent and uneventful. And so I got to go back into my product role. My customers were pretty happy in the direction we were headed. The team were happy because I was able to utilize a lot of the Agile Coach skills that I'd been using over the last few years at Spotify. And so that enabled me to be somewhat of a facilitative leader for the team. And because my background is not super duper techie, I really had to lean on my team anyway. So it worked out pretty well. I was doing this role for a while in an interim fashion. And then in order to make it real and not interim anymore, I was asked to present a roadmap and a strategy. And this felt really weird because for the most part, I felt like I was doing great. I was responding and adapting to the needs of my customers, and we were overall succeeding as a team. We were helping the quality of the product improve, and teams were able to move faster and faster when developing for the product. But hey, you know what? If this is all I needed to do to get the higher ups on board to make my role legit, so be it. So I whipped together a roadmap, and I put together some feedback from our customers justifying the decisions that we were making. And I suppose it was good enough. I got the job, which was great. And then after being in the role for not very long officially, they then gave me a little bit more responsibility. So all of a sudden now I'm being told I'm the product manager for the entire desktop client, which represented a third of all of Spotify's monthly active users. So if I think back, it's probably around about 15 million users. A little slight increase from the 10 to 15 or so featured developers that it was prior to that. So we had this really big reorg, and this was the result, was that a decision was made to take all of the people working out in feature teams, so like a search feature team or a browse feature team, radio feature team, and put them all into one big team focused on what the hell do we do with desktop. And suddenly I'm at the helm of the second biggest platform at Spotify, the desktop client for Mac and Windows, and I'm absolutely blown away and humbled that they would entrust me with so much responsibility. So humbled, in fact, that I remember a few times going back to some of my managers at the time and saying later on, after I think I'd moved on or something, saying, what was the real reason you gave me that responsibility? Like, come on, tell me. It wasn't like because I was this amazing product manager, right? Like there's got to be more to it than that. And it turns out, no one knew desktop better than I did, because I had already, I was like, because the feature teams didn't care too much about desktop. They were mostly focused on mobile, but I was very focused on desktop. So that was part of the reason. I already had a relationship with a lot of the people in my team. It was just an easy transition, frankly. So I really had a lot to prove, because I'm pretty sure in hindsight that I wasn't getting this job because I was all in all a really fantastic product manager, frankly. Because, and I'll get to this, I suppose, I hadn't even learned what that even means yet. So, suddenly my stakeholders are not only this like 15 million or so users, but they are organizations all across the company, feature teams in Stockholm, because they still had things that they wanted us to do, the advertising platform in New York City, content, the content teams, the algorithm teams in Boston, the new market launches teams, the works. Desktop was the most feature-rich client, the oldest client, with the second highest number of users. So my team went from about 8 or so people to over 20 located in both Stockholm and Gothenburg. So suddenly I'm faced with two main priorities that I need to do. Firstly, I need to motivate a bunch of feature developers from all over the company to be happy about joining my team and inspire them behind a compelling vision for the product. And if I didn't, there's a pretty good chance that they'd simply just go and join another team. And that was a very real possibility because internal mobility at the company was something that wasn't exactly hindered. And importantly, I needed to come up with a strategy for the product that enabled us to define our own destiny rather than the looming alternative, which was basically have everyone else tell us what they want us to do. But with this reorg also came a fundamental shift in how we looked at our own role. So at an event that we would run every couple of years called Product Days, all of the product owners would get together, and our chief product officer, Gustav, came out and said, okay, I'm changing the name of the role. You're no longer product owners, you're product managers. And at first I was like, are they the same thing? Like, what's that actually going to do though? What's it going to change? I was very skeptical of this change. But there was some good reasoning behind it. So put simply, we were now too big and too complex as a company to have product strategy broadly being created from the top down. We now had to act as product leaders, or as Gustav preferred to call us, product managers. And as a result of this shift, suddenly the desktop client, not that it had it before, but it had no vision, no mission, no strategy, no roadmap, just a bunch of inherited mini projects of work and a large team. It became clear quite quickly that my humble approach for being a product owner was not going to cut it. The expectations on me had grown, and my short-term inspect and adapt mentality was just not going to work if I was going to do the best thing that I could for this product. And so we were going to have to make decisions like which features should we potentially get rid of? What is the future of this product at the company, given what we know about mobile and other platforms, for example, tablets? Should we be focusing, where should we be focusing our product discovery and product delivery? How do I ensure that what we do is best for the company and not just what every person inside the company wants us to do, that we don't kind of sub-optimize? And it's not enough to do product discovery. How do we know which ideas and hypotheses to prioritize testing first, for example? So to recap, I gone from a basic definition of product ownership that you get in a certified Scrum product owner course, which is very delivery focused, to somewhat of an evolved perspective that encompasses discovery and trying to figure out whether or not something is worth building in the first place, to now realizing that there seems to be another evolution that I haven't quite figured out yet. I realized that I needed to grow a lot into this new idea of a product manager, but what does this really mean? Also, the other sort of shift that came with this sort of idea of product management is, we had a new VP of product coming in saying, we need more storytellers at this company. We need more storytelling in product management. We need to be spending less time on delivery and more time on strategy. There's not enough innovation coming out of our product teams, and too much time iterating in little pieces and not enough really big, bold bets that are going to move the product and the company forward. And so I would beg the question to you, especially if you're in one of these roles or you're helping coaching someone in this role, can you answer these questions? So there are big questions. These are big questions, and they require a lot of investigation, analysis, and research to answer. And sometimes you won't have all of this at your disposal. Sometimes you'll need your best guess, and then to seek out the answers as you go along. But why should your product continue to be funded? This is not something that you tend to think about when you think about a product owner role in a traditional sense. How does your product or your part of the product align to broader company strategy? How do you prioritize which opportunities to test and build? Where is your industry in general headed? What are your competitors doing? What direction are they going in? For example, also in my case, what's happening in the desktop computing and laptop computing space? Are we going to see less desktops? Are we going to see more laptops? Companies were coming out with detachables, all kinds of really weird, bizarre stuff was going on. That the difference between a laptop and a tablet was really starting to narrow in on each other. Microsoft was coming out with their Surface line. There was a lot happening in the industry. Where does your product fit into the broader market? So, for example, how does our product compare to, say, iTunes, for example? And where do you think it'll be in 5 to 10 years? And where does it fit in the overall customer funnel and customer journey for your company in general? So, one user might enter Spotify from many different angles. They might come in through the mobile client. They might come in through the website via a marketing offer, or they might even download desktop as their first point to start. So where does it fit in that journey? So in the case of Spotify's desktop client, I learned pretty quickly that we were iteratively improving its feature set, which sounds good. Sounds good in theory, but it turns out that the product already had a spectacular retention rate. So we weren't working on the right things, which brings me to a really important next point. You need to understand where your product is on the product lifecycle. So to use my previous example, we were focused on nailing it, right? We were really iteratively improving our feature set, but in reality, we should have been focusing on scaling it and milking it, because this part of the product had an extremely good retention rate. So why would we bother trying to get fractions of a percentage increase on retention when there are so many people out around the world that don't use the product? And what we knew from data is that if someone had the mobile client and then they got desktop, their chances of retaining in general for the company were much greater than if they just had mobile. And so it's this context that made us realize, well, we don't need to be messing around with like mildly improving features anymore. We need to get this into the hands of more people. So one example of this is the desktop client didn't even have a sign up feature. You actually had to be sent off to the website to sign up for Spotify, which was crazy. That was bonkers. So we shifted our focus to supporting new market launches, for example, by introducing new languages in the client. And we focused our energy on supporting sign up in the client so that we didn't have this clunky experience where you had to go off to a website. And importantly, we focused our attention on working on a partnership with Microsoft, where any new Windows 10 device globally in the markets that we were in would come sort of preloaded with Spotify, which was massive. And we wouldn't have put the energy in to try and push for such a partnership if it weren't for this realization of where we are in the broader product lifecycle. This is product strategy. This is the layer between your vision and your roadmap. So your job as a product manager is to grow your product and your team's ability to grow your product. So the more context you can provide your team, the better chance they have of improving the product. And why do you do this? Well, of course, it's to maximize the business and customer value. Or in some cases, it might be that you need to kill off the product, and that's the best thing for the product. But again, coming back to this idea of a tactical, delivery-focused product owner role, usually aren't given that level of mandate to be able to say, you know what, we're going to remove a feature. And they don't teach this in PO training typically. So your job is to grow the product and your team. So how do you do that? Well, you do that by making sense of internal within the company and external complexity, but then importantly, translating that and communicating it as a strategy. So there are so many data points that I needed to lean on in order to have these large realizations. But then when it came time to communicating it, I'm just going to bore people to tears or confuse them if I try to explain my reasoning for what we're doing with the client by just rattling off all of the data that led me there. So I need to find an eloquent way of explaining these things to people. So what I'm getting across here is you don't just manage a backlog and lead your team. You work extensively in the space outside of your team and process the signal to noise ratio for your team and stakeholders. You hold all of the complex around what to do with the product, and you try to communicate that complexity in a simple way. You own and evolve your product strategy. And over the years, I found it really hard to explain what a product strategy is. And so the following is my best attempt so far. I'm sure someone out there, I'm sure many people out there have a better answer for this, but here's my view on it. So strategy is how you plan to go about accomplishing your goal. It's the overall approach you're taking and the rationale for that approach. So to help explain it, I think it helps to compare it. So strategy helps you decide what problems to solve. Discovery gives you the tactics to validate your assumptions to then go ahead and decide whether to build the problems that you want to solve. And so then delivery is obviously building those validated solutions so that you can bring it out to the market. So again, strategy is this layer between your vision of where you want to be and where your high level product goals and the roadmap. So it explains the rationale behind why you've chosen to focus on a particular area and maybe not on another area. There are some helpful templates out there to do this, but there is no one size fits all approach to achieve this. And I think that's what makes it so difficult. If you look at this little picture on the screen, this is me in a whiteboard on a Sunday at the Spotify office trying to just make sense of what the hell to do with this product. And leaning on all of the data I could find and trying to make sense of it. And so whilst, that traditional idea of a product owner is yes, you have likely a few stakeholders that you're speaking to inform your decisions. In reality, ultimately, I think you should be speaking to a lot of different stakeholders to gain an understanding of what it is that you should be doing. So anywhere from legal, finance, your obviously your team and other teams, marketing, comms, business development, for example. You need to build relationships with many different parts of the organization. And I think there's a healthy tension here, because the more of this stuff you do, the less time you have to write the perfect user stories and acceptance criteria, for example. And I think balancing these two concerns is extremely difficult and kind of the paradox of this work. So you both need to be strategic and tactical. divergent and convergent. You need to be the visionary for your team and your product, but also you need to be able to get into the weeds. You need to help a whole bunch of people come together and make a decision about something, but also sometimes you just need to be ruthless and go, we're moving ahead, we're moving forward. And ultimately you're getting shit done. That's not much of a paradox. But I think it is somewhat paradoxical. You need to be quite humble as a product manager, because if you assume that your ideas are always right, you're pretty soon going to be proven otherwise. You need to be humble, but you need to be assertive. So I love the phrase, strong opinions held loosely. You need to have a certain attention to detail, but try not to get stuck in the weeds. You need the ability to inspire and lead others. However, you don't hold positional power. You need to be focused, but also curious. You need to be able to hold firm and say no quite often. You need to have a complexity of thought, but a simplicity of communication. And ultimately, you need to get shit done, but also be able to slow down in order to speed back up again. And some of the hardest skills here, I think, are having a certain level of grit, persistence, and humility. So knowing when to give up when you're wrong, and knowing when to persist despite the odds. Some people call this product instincts. I don't think it's something you can teach. I think it's something that you do again and again and again, and you slowly get better at over time. So then there's how not to be a PO. And I love this article that Marty Kagan has written called Behind Every Great Product. And in it, he writes, there are 3 ways for a product manager to work, and I argue only one of them leads to success. Firstly, they can escalate every issue and decision up to the CEO or your stakeholder. In this model, the product manager is really a backlog administrator. Lots of CEOs tell me that this is the model they're in and it's not working. If you think the product manager job is what's described in a certified Scrum product owner class, you almost certainly fall into this category. I'm quoting what he's written in the article, by the way. Or they can call a meeting with all the stakeholders in the room and then just let them fight it out. This is designed by committee and it rarely yields anything beyond mediocrity. This is very common in large companies. And in this model, the product manager is really a project manager and a roadmap administrator. And then finally, the product manager can do his or her job. And just a link to the article, if anyone is interested. It's a really well-written article. And here's what happens when you're empowered to say, so here's what happens when you're not empowered to say no. When you're merely executing on someone else's wishes, you end up with this. You end up with a product that no one wants. So I've had the wonderful chance to talk to a product manager that worked at Amazon when they were working on the Fire Phone. And he described this culture of control and micromanagement because Jeff Bezos was so motivated about this product and so involved at every tiny little step of the way that no one was able to say no to him. And so what happens when that happens? You end up with a product that is great for Jeff and no one else, basically. He told me a story of how Jeff wanted a specific button that you could press to turn off notifications on the phone for roughly the amount of time it takes to watch a movie. I shit you not. This was a very specific feature. However, in saying this, right, Jeff is one of the richest people in the world, and Amazon has built some incredible products. I'm not shitting on Amazon, but what I'm trying to get across is that even they are susceptible to what can happen when we don't try and work in this way. So I've talked a lot about product strategy. So I'll give you an example of a Spotify product strategy. And this is for the entire product. So I didn't come up with this, but this was Spotify's product strategy from the early days. So you can imagine Spotify released in Sweden as a beta. Then they started to grow across the world, having a lot of success because they were the first really to get the licenses from the music labels to offer free music. And one of the things that we used to talk about a lot was that Apple, Amazon, and Google are all going to, they're all going to put out music streaming products. And they're coming. It's not if, it's when. And all three of these companies have enormous amounts of money, really big pockets, and they can price gouge. They could offer the same kind of service quite easily at half the price. They also own the platforms to which we distribute the product, iOS and Android. So if they wanted to, they could preload their products on all new iOS or Android devices. We had the first mover advantage, but it's only a matter of time before they catch up. And at the same time, so that's kind of the market perspective as part of the strategy. And at the time, we saw a big shift in user behavior in terms of how people were using our product, from people thinking about music streaming as the same as they would with CDs. So I'm going to listen to this artist or this album or this track, to I'm actually going to create a playlist around my workouts, my dinner party, and these kind of moments in your day. And so with all of these pieces of the puzzle in mind, obviously there's a lot more, but just for the simplicity of the story, Gustav came up with this concept of short-term indefensible product differentiation. What that means is we will always continue to come up with reasons why our customers will choose us over our competitors if we keep innovating on our product. So even if they do decide to reduce the cost of their services, they'll still be willing to pay more for us because our product is superior. And that is partially part of the reason why the company is structured the way that it is around these kind of autonomous teams and so on, is because we wanted to really foster innovation. So because we looked into these changes in behavior around listening to music, this music for every moment statement became kind of the company motto. And that led to us buying a music curation company called Tunigo at the time. And it also eventually led to a massive investment in recommendations, because once Spotify gets good at recommending you music to listen to, you have more of a reason to stay with the product rather than shift to somewhere else that doesn't know you as well as Spotify does. This is a high level idea. So this is the rationale and the data that leads to the roadmap decisions that end up playing out in reality. And to kind of drive this home, one of the success stories was Discover Weekly for Spotify. And what I love about this story is that Daniel's perspective on it was that if it were up to him when that idea for the feature came about, he would have killed it. He would have said, nah, it's a stupid idea. He did not believe in it at all, which is hilarious because it's one of the most successful features that the company has ever put out. And he was not impressed. However, he believed in the fundamental idea that he is too far away from the team exploring this idea to be able to fully have a say in what goes on. So he respected this concept of really empowered product teams and product managers having the autonomy to pursue an idea. And it led to a successful feature that fundamentally changed how recommendations are done at the company in general, and drove huge growth for the company. So I did some reflecting and I was thinking, why was that a success? What was the sort of fundamental factors that led to that? So firstly, the team itself having a compelling vision and mission, and that vision and mission being aligned with the broader goals of the company, which I would describe as aligned autonomy. So it's all well and good to have a team have autonomy, but it needs to be in alignment with what the company is trying to achieve. So even just the notion that you just respond to whatever the customer needs are, is not enough. It needs to be aligned with the fundamental North Star goals of the company. And a great product manager is making this clear to the team. A common understanding of success metrics, a fail-friendly environment. So the story I just talked about before, Daniel didn't shut down the feature idea just because he didn't believe in it. Having the slack time in the teams that enabled the capacity to go off and explore an idea like this, even though it's not fundamentally on their plan at that point in time. And having the tools available to them to test an idea out in a cheap way before fully committing to it. So in my view, great product managers enable great products, and they do this through context, constraints, and vision for potential. They balance the tactical nature of discovering the right product to build and building it with strategic product strategy, alignment, and planning. So you can zoom in down to the minute tactical decisions that the PM was making with their team, but you can also zoom out to see how it fits with the rest of the company's strategy, metrics, and vision. This context being conveyed regularly is how the product hit that sweet spot. So after all of this time and all these learnings, leaving Spotify, joining a mental health nonprofit as the chief product officer, and now working as a consultant as I am now, my colleague Sandy and I came up with a framework to help product people grow in their role by self-assessing their capabilities, not just in isolation, but with their peers, and discussing how they can grow into the role. We call it the Product Management Competency Framework. It was recently featured on Mind the Product. It's completely free and open source. And it was, and I can, when I'm done, I'll post a link to this in the chat for you folks. But I just wanted to throw that out there because it's free and it's great. And we'd love feedback on it as well. So some final thoughts, because this is an agile kind of leaning meetup. I'll use a bit of an analogy. Most agile practitioners typically in my view, tend to start out as Scrum Masters. At that point, you'll hopefully understand the agile mindset, and you're using Scrum to help a team become agile, to focus on value, to focus on the customer, and adapt to change. But eventually you realize that Scrum is simply a framework to help you get started. It ultimately shouldn't be seen as the one and only and best way of working for every team. They need to transcend the Scrum guide to create something, to create a way of working that is still agile, but better suits their circumstances, which led to the concept of Agile coaches that are more practice agnostic. And now we're seeing even org coaches and systems coaches being at the forefront of Agile. We've transcended this notion that we're just about one particular way of working. And I'd argue that this transition is happening for product ownership. Many seem to start out as business folks that have learnt Agile practices in order to lead an Agile team. It's a tactical role focused on converting business and customer needs to an outcomes-focused backlog for a team. So like using user stories, for example, to execute on. But to truly evolve, this role needs to encompass so much more, because ultimately as a PO, you're the best placed to make product decisions with your team. You hold, and you can hold, more context about your product and your customers and the business than anyone else, short of maybe the CEO. But you're right down at the very ground level with your team. You need to evolve, and the company needs to support this evolution and empower you to take this very important place in your organization. In my view, it doesn't make sense anymore to just focus on delivering sprint by sprint. You need to be the leader of your product. Dare I say, the mini CEO analogy. And that's all I have to say. I should end by saying that working with product owners, product managers, and product teams is one of the things that we do at our company, Organa. We're passionate about growing POs and PMs, but also working with teams and leaders to grow how companies deliver value to customers. And when we teach our PO course, the IC Agile PO course, we teach this strategic perspective also, because we feel that it's vital for success in the role. We're a consulting, training, and coaching company where we have no managers, no business owners. We're simply for consultants passionate about helping companies grow their agile org and product capability. And if you think I might be able to add value to your organization, I'd love to chat to you some more, and you can find my details on the screen. Thanks for listening.
That was absolutely fascinating, Brendan. Thank you very much. I have to say your story is quite inspiring, just from where you started to where you came. It's almost 7, so I do want to open up for a couple of questions. I know there is a few that came up. Is there anybody who asked the questions who are there who'd like to voice out your questions?
Before that happens, can I just take a quick pic of yours?
Awesome. Actually, yeah, that would be good for everybody to turn on their camera, if that's okay, just for a moment as we take a good picture. Fantastic. All right.
I guess I have almost all of them. Jyoti, where are you? Just right in front. She's right in the center for me. All right. Give me one more minute.
All right.
Just a minute. Sorry. Okay.
All good, Vijesh. I took one. Don't worry.
Good.
Perfect. All right. Open to questions. Anybody has anything particular which you'd like to ask?
Okay. Well, I'd be willing to jump in. One of the things that intrigued me was you said that you would apply to Spotify. You kind of wanted to be a product owner. They hired you as an Agile coach. You stayed in the Agile coach role. You kept applying for product owner roles, and you kept getting turned down. And the feedback to you didn't really make any sense. And then one day, kind of a miracle happened, and they said yes. And I was kind of wondering how you navigate, what actually happened. Did you figure out what the code was that they were trying to tell you, or put the puzzle pieces together? How did you figure out what was the missing link and finally get this job? Or was it just serendipity happened? I mean, how would you?
It's going to be a rather unsatisfying answer, but I so happened to be in the right place at the right time. The PO roles that I was applying for were very consumer heavy, because that's what I was interested in. But I didn't have that more strategic experience. And so when they interviewed me, that was pretty clear that was coming through. So I would say that's, in hindsight, I didn't realize that at the time, but in hindsight, that was likely the reason that I got knocked back for those roles. And the reason I got the role that I did, which was even an interim one in the first place, so it wasn't even the full role, was because it was pretty safe to fail, I would say. The team, I was friends with a bunch of the people on the team. I had a good rapport with them already. They knew that I had some experience, but it was a highly technical team. So they knew that would be a great place for me to start, I think.
Okay. And so the magic happened, and then you move forward.
Then it was baptism by fire. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Why did you choose the term product manager over product owner? Okay. I mean, you could have redefined the role of product owner. You could have come up with a new term. For me, owner is a responsibility, whereas managing is a task, and it's managing as a task for someone else. So it doesn't have, for me, it doesn't have the same ring to it.
I like the word product management. That I like, because it's about managing a product, less about managing people, I would say. I like product ownership. I just think it comes with a whole lot of agile baggage, unfortunately. So maybe there will be a word that emerges that is neither of them that is better. Or maybe we all decide collectively as an agile community that product ownership should be more than what we typically tend to teach in these basic courses. But I don't care so much. I think, I hope that I'm a bit averse to the idea that you should have product owners and product managers, and the managers are more strategic and the owners are more tactical, and those two need, I can see scenarios where that will be a good idea because perhaps the product is really big and complex. But then I would say, well, wouldn't you want to split up the responsibility into smaller teams and so on? But that's a whole nother philosophical debate. But yeah, I mean, I'm not wedded to one or the other, frankly.
Okay.
But thanks for the question.
I got more questions, but I'll stand down and let someone else ask.
There was one. Anybody else have any question? There was one in the chat. Yes, Joanna, go on.
Thank you. I put it in the chat. So from your experience, like how do you do to avoid analysis paralysis?
Can you elaborate on, like, give me an example?
So because as a product owner, as you was like explaining that you have like so much information and you have to talk to different people in the business, that it gets too much information that then you get paralyzed and then it's difficult to take a decision.
In one way, that's the nice thing about the basic product ownership, like sort of Scrum team delivering every 2 weeks, is that you have a vehicle there to just to piggyback on, to just do it. I would say that first, acknowledging that you will never have all the answers. Unless you work on a website shop that has extremely good analytics that can tell you every little minute decision you're making, whether it's right or wrong, there's usually a lot of subjectivity to the decision-making process. So I think that just comes with experience of making decisions that are right and wrong, frankly. But not doing anything is the worst thing that you can do, I think.
Yeah.
In some ways. I don't know if there's any tricks or hacks I can think of that helps to get out of analysis paralysis. I mean, if you're in analysis paralysis, then the problem you're trying to solve is probably too large and you need to break it down to something smaller, I would say.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other question? Curious before, I know that we are hitting 7. Obviously, if you'd like to stay back, that would be fantastic. We will have the recording switch off. But any other questions before we logically kind of officially close the meetup and then unofficially kind of interact?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around for a bit longer.
Go on, Peter.
I could another question. I was thinking about, the product ownership as kind of it's almost a voyage or a career path. I mean, it seems to me that like your basic 2-day class is really teaching you the basics of working with the Scrum team, and part of it is much people, they need, what is it? They need to learn how Scrum works before they can even learn how the backlog works. And so there's a lot of basic, really basic stuff, and then they kind of go through a progression of finding their place in the organization. Then they get to the more tactical stuff of like, what is it? What are assumptions? How do you test them? How do you validate them? What are risks and how do you minimize them? And then the final step is then, being able to think strategically, and see your place in the larger whole. And, I've kind of been toying with this idea of a career path. I must admit, I don't really, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't really see that in anybody's, certification program, this concept of a career path. But I think I see that in your voyage. I'm not sure if I do or not, but so, when I talk about these 4 steps, basics of working with the team, finding your place in the organization, learning to validate your assumptions, learning to see your place in the whole. Does that seem like it's kind of the progression, or how do you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a great idea. I think that the challenging part about putting any kind of thing like that together for this particular role is that, if you want to be a software engineer, that depending on which kind of products you're going to work on and what languages you're going to learn, there's usually a lot of fairly well-defined paths to get there, and to evolve and grow. The problem with product is, I have this belief that if you take someone that works as a product owner or a product manager in a large enterprise company and stick them as the product person in a startup, they will fail miserably, and vice versa, because the things that you have to deal with are extremely different. And so to put together any kind of path feels fraught with danger, because ultimately the role is, it's very context driven. But I like the framing that you've given. I think it's probably somewhat broadly applicable. If you started out in any other role other than, say, maybe like a product marketing manager or someone that's more strategic in general, before they ended up in that role, because when that happens, you have the reverse problem, right? They need to learn how to be closer to the team and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's tricky.
Thanks a lot. Any final question before we kind of lock down? Once again, I want to thank you, Brendan. That was absolutely great. Hearing how your journey aligns with what many people might aspire to do as well. So it's kind of a good gap. Any final thing before we kind of logically, officially close off? Awesome. In that case, it was lovely having you all here again. If you wish to stay back to say hi to either Peter, who's over here, as well as Brendan, Jyoti. We have quite a lot of people who are here. So if you'd like to stay back to say hi, more than welcome. With that, I'm closing the recording so that we can have the real conversation.